بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
إنك لا تنادي فهبوا يا بني قومي أسودا أعيدوا للدنا أمجاد عصر وفلوا بالحديد لنا القيود.
Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I'm making this video because I've been challenged by an individual here on YouTube to respond to a private message he sent me, which the subject matter was titled Challenge. The message in question then went on to say the Great Challenge, and said that point one of this Great Challenge was that, as the person states, in the Quran it states that the Jews say that Ezra is the son of God, chapter 9, verse 30. The person says that this is historically and theologically incorrect. The person then says the Jews call Ezra the son of Allah, and the Christians call the Christ the son of Allah. This is a saying from their mouth. In this they imitate what the unbelievers of old used to say. Allah is cursed beyond them, how they are deluded away from the truth. The person then continues to say, Abdul Yusuf Ali has translated the verse falsely. I assume that this was a deliberate lie. Then he says, this verse does not make any difference between Christians saying Jesus is the son of God and the Jews saying the same, but about Ezra. The person then says, I know that IslamicAwareness.org made this article about the topic, but AnsweringIslam.org has the response to it. So I'm going to pause there. That's not even the whole PM, the whole message. But I want to respond to just this first part, because this is going to take up the majority of the video. Now, some background information is going to be needed for anyone viewing this video of mine to fully understand and grasp what is going on. So what I would recommend to get up to speed is in the More Info section. If you look to the right of your screen and you see the little button for More Info, you click on that. I've provided several links to different places, different websites. The first link is to IslamicAwareness.org's article entitled Was Ezra Called the Son of God? And it's by two scholars, MSM Dr. Saifullah and Mustafa Ahmed. And the other article is AnsweringIslam.org's website and their article, which apparently is a refutation to this article. Now, a casual reader, when reading both articles with an open mind, are going to realize several things. One, that the statement made by this user on YouTube regarding that this is theologically and historically incorrect, what the Quran is claiming. So let's be clear here. In chapter 9, verse 30, the Quran is making the assertion that the Jews believed or said that Ezra was the son of God. The person is saying this is historically and theologically incorrect. Yet what's interesting is that the references used by Dr. Saifullah and Mustafa Ahmed in their article are from historians, and with theological implications as well, as found. The references are Encyclopedia Judaistica, which is a encyclopedia, well-known encyclopedia on Judaism. The second is by the historian J.D. Newby, A History of the Jews of Arabia. And then also George Sale's historical commentary on the Quran, and also another historian, J. Walker, who is Ezra, the Muslim World. Okay, so what's interesting, this person is saying, oh, but this is historically incorrect. Well, according to who? Because in this article, in Islamic Awareness' article alone, they've actually proven that it is not only historically valid, but also that it is theologically valid and therefore correct. But the thing is, this person is getting his information from AnsweringIslam.org. What he's doing is he or she, rather, well, actually, I should say it's a he. His screen name has Mr. in the title. Is parroting and regurgitating things he's finding in Answering Islam's article. Okay. Now, I'm familiar with this argument. I've actually read both articles before. And when you go do a casual reading of AnsweringIslam.org's website, you find that they don't even refute the entire article. Okay? I'm going to go through bits and pieces of it. You can read it for yourself, and so that I'm not accused of taking things out of context. You can read the article for yourself. I'm providing it for you on the right-hand. Or you can read along with me and then see the places that I skip, because I don't have enough time to go through an entire refutation of their article, because there really doesn't need to be one. With regards to the fact they only mention like 4 elements from Dr. Saifullah's article, they don't even try to tango with the historical evidence that's provided by these key historians. Now, the first subject is Islamic awareness addresses a problematic statement in the Quran in this article, which stating Ezra, who was exalted by a community of Jews, is identified by Ezra by Muslim commentators. The Quran says the Jews call Ezra the son of Allah, and the Christians call Christ the son of Allah. That is a saying from their mouth. In this, they are imitating what the unbelievers of old used to say. Allah's curse beyond them, how they are deluded away from the truth. Then the author from Answering Islam says the Quran is clearly wrong in saying that the Jews believed in Ezra as the son of God. The person says, I have read Jewish history. I've also consulted several rabbis concerning this question. The Jewish people do not believe, and have never believed, that Ezra is the son of God. Dr. Sayafullah first gives us a biography of Ezra, then attempts to save the Quran from its error. Now, see, here's the problem. When you're an author, okay, and you say, I've read this, I've read that, I've talked to this person, I've talked to this person, that's nice. In fact, I don't even deny that this person has done that, but you're going to have to provide a little bit more evidence than that. You're going to have to actually... What books did you read? The difference between Answering Islam's article and this should be noted very by people who actually care on an academic level about this article. If we were to analyze it on an actual intellectual academic level. The difference between Answering Islam's article and Islamic Awareness is that Islamic Awareness cites their sources. Answering Islam does not. In fact, they have no sources. You go all the way to the bottom of the article, there is no source material. There isn't any. What this person is actually doing is just saying what comes off the top of his head. Now, I'm not implying that they don't quote anything. Of course, they quote several sections from 4th Ezra, as you can see, which is also known as 2nd Ezra, which is a Jewish apocryphal text. They do quote that, but it's not an academic source. They're not actually quoting anything else beyond that as far as to refute the historians that are quoted by Dr. Sayafullah. So this person's saying that he's talked to several rabbis. Okay, well, just because they're a rabbi doesn't mean they're a historian. It doesn't mean that they actually know what Yemenite Jews, nor do they know verbatim what Jews living in Medina believed in specifically. Whereas later in this video, I will show that there are Jews and rabbis that actually concede to this point. In fact, what's funny is that Answering Islam, in their hope to refute Dr. Sayafullah, quote the Encyclopedia Judicia. The Encyclopedia Judicia is a very great source encyclopedia on Judaism, whether on a theological, historical, cultural level. And the scholars they are quoting, the editors of the encyclopedia, were Jews. They are Jews. So to say that that no rabbi or that no Jewish scholar or no one at all concedes to this point, and never they say that it never happened, is again, that's not actually true in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, to quote the Encyclopedia Judicia is a major piece of evidence, and it just is say, oh no, I talked to a couple people and they say no, or I read a couple books. And, well, first of all, what book titles did you read? What did you read? And even if you read a book on the history of the Jewish people, to say that they're necessarily going to go into detail about the Jews living in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula, I don't know. You'd have to provide me with those books. But anyway, moving on. The person then says, he then, again, reproduces what Dr. Sayafullah says, and quotes the Encyclopedia Judicia, which in turn is a scholar, but then quotes a theory, an assumption on the scholar's part by using the words of Ibn Hazm, who said that there were Jews living in Yemen that did believe that Ezra was the son of God. Okay? And then according to Muslim historical sources, Yemenite Jews who had converted to Islam, who believed that Ezra was the Messiah, etc., and that he was the son of Allah. So this is according to the Encyclopedia Judicia. Now, Answering Islam, in their attempt to refute this paragraph, simply throws a complete straw man. It's a complete straw man argument, where they say that it should be noted that Ibn Hazm lived during the late 9th and early 10th centuries in Cordoba, Spain. Therefore, his attempts are pure conjecture and are nothing more than an attempt to explain away this error in the Quran. Also, notice the words propose and assumption. There are no records from any Jewish community that believed Ezra was the son of God. Okay? So what's interesting is that this is a complete straw man on every level, because Ibn Hazm was a historian, he was a scholar. Now, I'm going to give you an analogy. I have a book called God's Crucible by David Lewis, a historian, a 21st century historian. He is writing a book that talks about historical events that happened from the 7th century to the 13th century, but yet he's living in the 21st century. Am I to think that he's completely full of crap because he's a historian living in the 21st century? No, of course not. If I were to say that, then I would have to basically ignore historians as an academic pursuit. I would have to deny the entire occupation in science of history. I'd have to deny the entire thing. This is what Answering Islam's trying to do here. They're trying to say, oh, well, Ibn Hazm lived in the late 9th and early 10th century in Spain. Therefore, everything he says is just pure conjecture. No, that's not true, because Ibn Hazm is saying that he knows on a historical level that there were what the people of Yemen believed in. Okay? Instead of actually attacking Ibn Hazm, which is a fallacy unto itself, you'd have to prove that he's wrong about that. And again, what's funny is that Encyclopedia Judicia, again, quoted by Answering Islam, says, an allusion to the figure of Ezra as the apostle of the Messiah is found in a tale which is widespread among the Jews of Yemen, according to which Ezra requested that they immigrate to Erez Israel, and because they did not, he cursed them. Yemenite Jews have therefore refrained from naming their children Ezra. You know what's funny about that? The author of this article on AnsweringIslam.org just got done saying that there is no evidence that the Yemenite Jews believed that Ezra was the son of God, and yet Encyclopedia Judicia produces evidence that they did actually believe that. Okay. What is Answering Islam's response to this? If the Yemenite Jews are so offended by Ezra's curse that they refuse to name their sons Ezra, how could the Jews of Yemen have ever considered Ezra to be the son of God? Again, this is another straw man. So what? Right? Ezra cursed them, according to the source, according to the tradition, because they wouldn't move. Yet, that does not mean that they then said, oh, well, you know what, they cursed us, therefore, you know what, Ezra's actually not a son of God. No, because if you look through the Bible itself, it shows multiple places where that prophets in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, cursed the children of Israel, or they spoke out against the children of Israel, or they said negative things towards the children of Israel, and yet the children of Israel still believe to this day that they are prophets. They do not deny these people as being righteous people in the eyes of God, nor do the people living during their time believe or disbelieve in them. A great example for Answering Islam, since I know that their majority of them are a bunch of Christians, would be Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a Jew. His followers were Jew. And yet he spoke out and condemned many elements of his people's practices. And yet, did Peter say, "Oh, Jesus, he is just going off on us. I don't think we should actually follow him anymore. He's not the Son of God. He's not the Messiah. He's not even a prophet." No, they didn't say anything like that, because they understood what he was doing. And they didn't deny. Just because someone calls someone out on their crap doesn't mean something that defaults them. This is a straw man and very weak at best. Now, continuing on, they throw another many straw men. Actually, red herrings. So, fallacy after fallacy in this article. And if you do careful examination, you'll see this for yourself. And then the article... before we go on to the next part of the article, and also which therefore becomes the next part of the YouTube user's message to me, because I'm very convinced that the user who sent me this challenge simply read Answering Islam's article and then just sort of summarized, because the pattern of both is very similar. Before I go on to that, I'm going to point out that the last part of the article, and therefore this person's point, that apparently the Quran is false, and saying that Jews believed that Ezra was the son of God. The last part of Answering Islam's article says, notice that the Quran says the Jews and not some Jews. This wording indicates that the verse is talking about the mainstream majority of the Jewish community. Notice also that this passage says the Christians, referring to the majority of Christians, call Christ the Son of God, in spite of the fact that there were heretical groups in Arabia who denied this belief. Okay, how do these people know this? I'm just wondering, how do the Answering Islam team know that that's what the Quran is saying? or that the Prophet, after receiving this revelation, told his companions that that's what this means, right? How do they know that we as Muslims actually believe this? How do they know that? Well, they don't know. What they're doing is they picked up one word and they're trying to therefore disprove the Quran by saying, look, the Quran is saying the vast majority of Jews believe that Ezra is the son of God. And yet we know this is not correct. We know this because if you look at the Tafsir of Ibn Abbas, may God be pleased with him, was a companion of the Prophet. And his Tafsir is very important because it's one of the earliest Tafsirs, and Ibn Abbas learned his Tafsir from the Prophet himself. Alright? Tabari, in his Tafsir, also uses Ibn Abbas as a great authority and a weight for his own Tafsir on the subject. And so we know that the Prophet taught that this is talking about specific Jews and Christians. How do I know this? Because in the description section, there's a link to the Tafsir of Ibn Abbas where it states that it's referring to specific Jews and Christians, not to the majority of actually either group. Right? But for those of you who are not satisfied with that, let us continue down the road here, shall we? If we go to the glorious Quran, text translation commentary done by Abdul Majid Darabi, with an introduction by Sheikh Abdul Hassan al-Nadi, so produced by the Islamic Foundation. They have done commentary, their own tafsir on the verse, and this is what they say on the subject, with referring to, and the Jews say Ezra is the child of God. It says, Ezra of the Bible, whose official title in the Jewish tradition is the scribe of the words of the commandments of the Lord and his statutes for Israel, that is cited from Freelander's book, The Jewish Religion, page 125, and whose work constitutes a landmark in the history of Judaism. One of the most important personages of his day and a far-reaching influence upon the development of Judaism. That's from the same source. That's from the Jewish Encyclopedia, volume 5, page 32. Spinoza says, go so far as to attribute the composition of the Pentateuch not to Moses, but to Ezra, which view appears to have existed even at the time of the Apocrypha. So again, from the same Jewish Encyclopedia, volume 9, page 590. He is said to have been restored not only the law, which had been burnt, but also all other Hebrew scriptures which had been destroyed, and 70 apocryphal works in addition. Okay, these are all from scholars. With the return, i.e. since the era of Ezra, began the codification of the Torah and Scriptures, their translation, exegesis, and development of their intensive teachings. From now onwards, Judaism can be spoken of as a distinct from the religion of Israel. In other words, this is when Judaism as we know it today came into existence. Again, this is from Jewish Encyclopedia, page 339. He succeeds in reviving what increased strength of the old Jewish national religious ideal, and because he did so, he is called the father of Judaism. It's from the Columbia Encyclopedia, page 599. He was the first of the scribes, or Safran. But what exactly were they, and what standing had they in Jewish theology? Not only were they the great authorities on the text of the Scriptures and on its interpretation, but it was they who first fixed the norm of Jewish religious practice, and they were considered competent to effect whatever changes they liked, even in the Scripture. In fact, they did introduce 18 changes into the text of the Pentateuch, i.e. the Torah, chiefly in order to soften expressions which were considered too harsh by a later age. They also modified some of the precepts of the Pentateuch in order to meet the spirit of the age and the needs of the times. These modifications are called, in the Talmud, Dibri Safran, the words of the scribes, and were accepted as binding by later generations. Again, this is from the Jewish Encyclopedia, page 585 to 586. It says, Ezra's traditional tomb is on the Tigris near its junction with the Euphrates. That's from a historian Laylorn in his book, Nineveh and Babylon, page 501. Okay, so that's one tafsir. Also, Abdul Yusuf Ali, since both Islamic Awareness and Answering Islam have favored his translation, Abdul Yusuf Ali, in his he devotes a whole appendix in his translation of the Quran, his commentary on the development of the Torah. He mentions very similar, there's parallels between what I just read and what Abdullah Yusuf Ali says as well. Now, I'm reading now from the tafsir done by Maulana Muhammad Ali, the Holy Quran. his tafsir on the subject says as follows: that there was a sect among the Jews who raised Ezra to the dignity of Godhead, or Son of God, is shown by Muslim historians. Castellani says in the Kitab al-Neha that there was a party of Jews who held this belief. Nor do the Jews deny this allegation. The Quran too mentions it only here in connection with the Christian doctrine, never blaming the Jews directly in the many controversies with them in the earlier chapters, and this shows that the Jewish nation as a whole was not guilty of entering this belief. Another explanation of the statement made here is the free use of the word son. Elsewhere, the Quran says the Jews and the Christians, they call themselves the sons of Allah and His beloved ones, in chapter 5, verse 18. The meaning only being that they are considered themselves special favorites of the divine being. Hence, the belief regarding Ezra may be interpreted in the same light, for there is clear evidence that the Talmudists used very exaggerated language concerning him. Among the prophets of Israel, Ezra was specially honored. In rabbinical literature, Ezra was considered worthy of being the vehicle of the law, had it not been already given through Moses. He is regarded and quoted as the type of person most competent and learned in the law. The rabbis associate his name with several important institutions, and that is all from the Jewish Encyclopedia. To end this section off, I will read now from the Tafsir of Muhammad Asad, who, his translation of the Holy Quran, uses over 20 classical tafsirs ranging from the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet himself, all the way down to modern exegesis, all building upon each other. What does he say about the subject regarding this verse? He says, this statement is connected with the preceding verse which speaks of the erring followers of earlier revelation. The charge of shirk, that ascribing of divinity or divine qualities to aught besides God, is leveled against both the Jews and the Christians in amplification, as it were, of the statement that they did not follow the religion of truth which God had enjoined upon them. As regards the belief attributed to the Jews that Ezra, or in the Arabized form of this name, Uzair, was God's son, it is to be noted that almost all classical commentators of the Quran agree in that only the Jews of Arabia, and not all Jews, have been thus accused. According to the tradition, the authority of Ibn Abbas, quoted by Tabari in his commentary on the verse, some of the Jews of Medina once said to Muhammad, "How could we follow thee when thou hast forsaken our Qibla and does not consider Ezra a son of God?" Okay, this is an authentic tradition found in this Tafsir of Tabari, as quoted by Ibn Abbas, stating that the Jews are saying to the Prophet Muhammad, how can we follow you if you don't say that Ezra is the son of God? It's from their own lips. So for people to say, oh, they never said anything like that. They never actually said anything. No, they really did. Here you have proof right here for it. Continuing, Muhammad Asad continues, on the other hand, Ezra occupies a unique position in the esteem of all Jews, as has always been praised by them in the most extravagant terms. It was he who restored and codified the Torah after it had been lost during the Babylonian exile, and edited it in more or less the form which it has today, and thus he promoted the establishment of an exclusive legislative type of religion that became dominant in later Judaism. That's from Encyclopedia Britannica. Ever since then, he has been venerated to such a degree that his verdicts on the law of Moses has come to be regarded by the Talmudists as being practically equivalent to the law itself, which in Quranic ideology amounts to the unforgivable sin of shirk, inasmuch as it implies the elevation of a human being to the status of quasi-divine lawgiver and the blasphemous attribution to him, albeit metaphorically, of the quality of sonship in relation to God. In this connection, in Exodus it says, Israel is my son, or in Jeremiah, I am a father to Israel, expressions to which, because of their idolatrous implications, the Quran takes strong exception to. So, again, this is all evidence that from a Muslim perspective, going all the way back to the Prophet himself, that we are not accusing, the Quran is not accusing all Jews of saying this. It was only directed towards the Jews of Arabia, more specifically Medina and Yemen. So, again, to assume that we are saying this is, again, false, based on everything that I just read. Now let's continue, because as I said, the article continues, and the person who's summarizing, the YouTube user who's summarizing this for me, they both touch upon the same thing. They go then to a hadith that has a similar statement. Okay? And they quote it completely out of context. They don't even quote the whole thing. It's a very small portion. Now, the Answering Islam team just goes on to say, oh, well, how did he make this up? And, basically, they accuse Muhammad of being ignorant. He didn't know anything about Jewish theology. He didn't know anything about any of this stuff, etc., etc., etc. The YouTube user, on the other hand, basically tells me, after quoting a small portion of this hadith, and I'll quote it. This is all he quotes for me. He says, by the way, he continues. He says, everyone who tries to refute this charge will fail because of the following hadith. And he only quotes a small portion. He says, then the Jews would be summoned, and it would be said to them, what do you worship? They will say, we worship Ezra, son of God. It would be said to them, you tell a lie. God has never had a spouse or a son. And he says that's from Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. The YouTube user then continues and says, we clearly see how Jews are seen as polytheists. No Jew on this world who has ever lived would say that he worshipped Ezra. Okay. Now I've already explained by quoting the Tafsirs what the Quran is connotating by saying that they say that Ezra is the son of God. I've already cleared that up. But let's look at the interesting interpretation by this person who takes this hadith out of context. That the hadith now, not the Quran, but the hadith, as found in Bukhari, is actually calling the Jews polytheists. And let us see, based on the language of the hadith, whether that's even true. Because you have to understand something. I don't know if this person knows this. That the Quran is very clear when it's referring to mushrikeen, those who are polytheists, those who are pagans, those who are idolaters, those who reject the actual oneness of God, and it also has a different term for Jews and Christians. This is something that should be understood based on the Arabic of the Quran and the Hadith. Now, I'm going to start off from the Hadith. In my book format, I don't read this stuff online. I have the actual hard copy, as you can see in the screen. It is Sahih Bukhari, Volume 6 I'm reading from, the book of Tafsir, or commentary, Hadith number 4581. I'm going to start right when God is calling people forward on the Day of Judgment. This is what will happen. God will then say, let every nation follow that which they used to worship. Then none of those who used to worship anything other than Allah, like idols and other deities, but will fall in hellfire, till there remains none but those who used to worship Allah, both those who were righteous, pious ones, and mischievous, evil ones, and some of the people of the Scripture. Okay, so right off the bat, if you just read the context of this hadith, it refutes what this person was saying. Because the hadith itself makes a clear differentiation between polytheists and the people of the book and those who are not members of the people of the book, i.e. people who are just straight up monotheists. This includes Muslims, but this is specifically talking about just pure monotheists. So right off the bat, polytheists dropped out of the hadith. Who's left? The people of the book, the Muslims, pure monotheists. Okay? That is what the hadith just said right off the bat. So right off the bat, refutation on that assertion that the hadith is implying that the Jews are polytheists. But let us continue. It then says, then the Jews will be called upon. It will be said to them, what did you used to worship? They will reply, we used to worship Ezra, the son of Allah. It will be said to them, you are liars, for Allah has never taken anyone as a wife or a son. What do you want now? They will say, O our Lord, we are thirsty, so give us something to drink. They will be directed and addressed thus, will you drink, whereupon they will be gathered unto hellfire, which will be like a mirage, whose different sides will be destroying each other. Then they will fall into hellfire. Afterwards the Christians will be called upon. It will be said to them, what did you used to worship? They will reply, we used to worship Jesus, the son of Allah. It will be said to them, you are liars, for Allah has never taken anyone as a wife or a son. They will be said to them, what do you want? They will say what the former people have said. Then, when there remain in the gathering none but those who used to worship Allah, alone, the real Lord of Al-Amin, mankind, jinn, and all that exists, whether they were righteous, pious ones, or mischievous ones, then Allah, the Lord of Al-Amin, will come to them in a shape nearest to the picture they had in their minds about him. It will be said, what are you waiting for? Every nation has followed what it used to worship. They will reply, we left the people in the world when we were in great need of them, and we did not take from them as friends. Now we are waiting for our Lord, whom we used to worship. Allah will say, I am your Lord. And they will say twice or thrice, we do not worship anything besides Allah. Okay? So this whole hadith in the context is fully proving that the people who are put into hellfire are those who committed shirk. Okay? But yet, as I just proved, based on the Prophet's own teachings, which can be found in the Tafsirs, this verse, this hadith, and the verse in the Quran from which it stems from is only referring to specific Jews, not to them in general terms. So you cannot say, first off, that they are polytheists according to the hadith, because they're not, nor can you say that that this is now saying that all Jews and all Christians are going to hell. That is, of course, not what Islam teaches, and that is, of course, not what this hadith is implying. So no, we do not clearly see they are polytheists. You only saw that because you didn't read the whole hadith in its context. Now, I've now just gone through the majority of what this person sent me. Okay, the rest of the Answering Islam article is just a bunch of red herrings, one after the next. You can see this for yourself. Please read the rest of it. And then they have some issue with the translation, which was a remark that the YouTube user said, that Yusuf Ali rendered it in English in a way that it shouldn't have been rendered. To me, that's neither here nor there. Okay, you have different translations. The person who translates decides how they want to translate it. You know, I don't see what this has to do with the actual overall theological argument. Now, the person brings up a second point, which, again, would cause a whole nother video. So I'm not even going to address it, really. I'm just going to say that if you want to believe this sort of stuff, you want to believe that history, certain people who believe certain historical events are false, I'm not going to stop you. The person says, point number 2. It might be true that from the Bible you can see an interpolation in the story of the binding of Isaac. But the Islamic version that Hagar and Ishmael went to Mecca and that Zamzam originated there is extremely false. Again, this person gives me no evidence to the contrary, but just says that it's false as if I'm supposed to take his word for it. Excuse me. Then he says, point A, you cannot come from Canaan to Mecca with one bottle of water. Okay. Point B, the Bible clearly tells us that Zamzam is in the area of Beersheba. Okay, like I said, whatever. I don't even know why this person is bringing this up. To me, this has nothing to do with the original argument. But I will counter all of this by simply advising the user to read an excellent book by Gerald F. Dirks. You know, very interesting individual. Written several books. He used to be a Methodist, become a Muslim. He's got his BA, and he's a medical doctor from Harvard. PhD. He's a psychologist, and has devoted a lot of his spare time to studying history and writing on comparative religion. And the book is called Abraham, the Friend of God, by, I said, Gerald F. Dirks. This is a whole biography on Abraham, and he actually utilizes Genesis and the Quran and the Hadith to formulate a very comparative religious volume on the biography of Abraham, peace be upon him. And so, again, really, if you think that what Muslims say about history, about specifically this issue, is false, then okay, fair enough. I really could care less whether you think it's false or not. However, you want to see an alternative to what you are probably summarizing from another Answering Islam article, then I would advise you to read this book. Just read it for yourself if you like. Check it out from your local library. You know, give it a shot. But yeah, therefore, as I've gone through the entire article by this individual, I accepted the great challenge, and I hope I have done a fair enough job in answering the challenge. So therefore, again, to the individual in question, again, I have no hostility towards you. I hope, for your sake, and this goes for everyone watching this video, including myself, that we can actually go beyond what one person tells us, and actually go way beyond. Go to secondary, secondary sources, third sources. Just, go with one subject and study as much as you can on it. Even as we've seen, just one verse can lead to a half-an-hour video from me. Alright? So obviously, there is a lot of things to consider, a lot of things to read, and to simply read one person's article, two people's article, again, you have to be constantly asking yourself, where are these people getting this information from? What are their source material? These are things they teach you when you're a freshman in college. These are things that they probably even teach you when you're in high school or middle school. To ask, where are you getting this from? In fact, I know you get it in middle school because you are taught, at least here in the United States, you're trying to do a bibliography. You have to cite your sources. You can't just say, I talked to my daddy who's a rabbi, or I talked to so-and-so, and actually use that as evidence. You actually have to give out evidence. You have to actually produce your evidence, produce your proof, and therefore ascertain the truth from those documents and from that evidence. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope this was enlightening, and I hope that it is beneficial to the ongoing conversation about not only Surah 9, but just the issue or the concept of comparative religion and the study thereof. Thank you everyone. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.